Well, that was a bummer. You know, you never know if your team's going to win the national championship. A team could be really good. They could be the best team in the country. They can be the prohibitive favorite to win the national championship. But getting all the way there, winning the whole thing, is hard. It's a hard thing to do, even when you're the best in the country. And for 34 games this year, even with a loss in there, Pitt was the best team in the country. And maybe even last night, Pitt was the best team in the country. But for last night, Pitt was not the best team in the KFC Yum Center. For one set, Pitt was the best team in the KFC Yum Center. And then they lost the second set to Louisville, but it's okay. It's going to be back and forth, and it's no problem because in the third set they were up 23-19. And they reached set point. Louisville bounced back. They reached set point again. Louisville answered. They reached set point again. Louisville answered, and one more time, 4 times, Pitt reached set point, but could not close the set. Could not beat Louisville in the third set, ended up dropping that set to the Cardinals, and then Louisville more or less ran away with the fourth set. All of the momentum was in the Cardinals' favor, even when Anna de Beer got hurt and went out. All the momentum was with the Cardinals, in addition to the fact that they were playing at home, which adds a whole lot of momentum when you come back the way they came back to win that third set, knowing that they had lost twice already to Pitt this season, knowing that losing that third set would almost inevitably assure Pitt of a win and Louisville of a loss. The Cardinals came back and won that third set, energized the building, energized the team, took all of the momentum, and they carried it over into the fourth set where they were the better team. They were the team that didn't make the mistakes. They were the team that were the hunters. They were the team that were the killers. And we talked all season. I talked all season about how this Pitt team is a bunch of killers, and they're able to put their foot on other teams' throats, and they shut them down. They are just that good. Well, that's what Louisville did to Pitt last night. And particularly in the fourth set, it was just mistake after mistake. The kinds of mistakes that Pitt really didn't make that many of this year. They're an aggressive team, at times reckless in their aggressiveness, but they didn't make mistakes for the most part the way they did last night. Communication errors. Just not making that extra push. And Louisville did. And so Louisville advances to the national championship on Sunday, and Pitt's season is over. It was an incredible season. It was amazing to watch. It was incredibly fun to follow. This team was the best team in the country. They were the best sports team in the city. I think they still probably are, despite their early exit. And it's funny to talk about an early exit from the NCAA tournament when you're talking about a team that loses in the Final Four, but the expectations really were that high. And I think it's one of those sort of paradoxes or conundrums or situations where, boy, what a great season. And because of how great that season was, it made the finish all that more disappointing. It doesn't take away from the season. It just leaves it unfulfilled and unsatisfied. And it's unfortunate for some of the seniors on this team, like Rachel Fairbanks and Emmy Klicka and Valeria Vasquez Gomez. Some of the girls who really made this team great. Emmy Klicka, one of the most underrated players on the team, in the conference, in the nation, for what she's able to do. I'm going to bring up the stats. I just wanted to have this in. I meant to have this in front of me. Last night she had 21 digs. And really not many mistakes. She played well. Rachel Fairbanks, 53 assists in that one. 1 ace. She also had 10 digs. Valeria Vasquez Gomez finished with 8 kills, 5 digs, 1 ace. A good glue player is what she is. And it's unfortunate for them. They've been here through this run of 4 consecutive Final Fours, and their careers are over at Pitt. And that's unfortunate. Kat Flood as well. She came out, contributed 3 digs in her time on the court. It's just unfortunate. For as much as those girls, those women have contributed to the program, how much success they've helped lead it to go out like that. And there's no good way to go out. The only good way to go out is as a champion. And that wasn't that wasn't in the cards for Pitt this year. Olivia Babcock, of course, 33 kills. No aces, 1 service error, 5 digs, 2 blocks, kind of standard for her. Tori Stafford with a double-double, 18 kills and 15 digs, had some injury issues pop up there. I mean, you got what you would expect from most of these girls and how they played last night. Only 2 aces, and that was kind of a big separator. They had 2 aces, and Louisville had 8. So, I mean, that was a big difference. But when it came down to it, Louisville was just they made the extra plays. They put in the extra effort, and I hate to say things like they wanted it more. That's one of my least favorite sports cliches. They wanted it more, but in the end, they made the plays. And Pitt's season, as magical as it looked, comes to an end. I don't think it's the end of the program or anything like that because they've got the coach of the year in Dan Fisher. As long as he's back, that's going to be a good thing. They've got Olivia Babcock and Tori Stafford as sophomores. As long as they're back, that's going to be a good thing. I think there's some young talent coming up. They're going to find a new setter. They'll need someone to step in for Rachel Fairbanks. And obviously they'll need someone to step in for Emmy Klicka in those crucial roles that those girls played. But I think there's some good young talent. I think when you have the success that Pitt has had, you end up recruiting well, and I think they have. And so this should be a very good team again next year. It's hard to think about that too much though when you're still less than 24 hours away from pretty disappointing loss like the one they took last night, falling to Louisville 3-1. Season ends. It's over for Pitt volleyball. There'll be no national championship match for Pitt on Sunday. That season is done. It is our mailbag today, though. Kind of planned it out. Figured we'd take a lot of mailbag questions, but we'd spend the opening of the episode right here talking about Pitt volleyball. We were hoping it would be a more pleasant conversation, but that's the way it goes. One team wins, one team loses. Anybody who loses in the Final Four is not a bad team. They just were not the better team that night. And that's the case with Pitt. Great season, disappointing finish. Let's try to find some better things to talk about. Let's get some questions. Morning Pitt Mailbag right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, let's get started here on the mailbag, the Morning Pitt Mailbag on the Friday edition of the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I know still adjusting the lighting and things in here. We'll get this figured out with our new studio setup. For now, we have the light side and the dark side, but that's how it goes. Listen, don't forget to check out homefieldapparel.com for all the best Pitt gear that you can possibly hope for. They've got Pitt gear and plus shirts and sweatshirts and jackets and koozies and dad hats and bomber jackets and all kinds of awesome stuff, joggers and all kinds of things for lots of teams all across the country. So whether you want new Pitt gear or a sweet sweatshirt for another school that either you love or somebody else loves, the place to get it is homefieldapparel.com. So make sure you go there and use the promo code PIT24 to get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. Again, the promo code PIT24, 15% off homefieldapparel.com. All right, let's jump into the questions. We've got a lot of great ones this week and some that I had to do a quick research for, so I'm looking forward to that. And I've gone and closed the browser window. Now, why would I do that? Oh, I know, because I was doing some research on some things. So let's get into the questions, though, that we actually have in front of us. Atwood409 says, is there a guy during the Narduzzi era that transferred down that really excelled at either his FCS or Group of 5 school? There's a lot of complaining about the Western Carolina guys visiting, but these guys are all conference performers there. Many of the guys that have been on Pitt's roster transferred down and don't seem to produce at all. I think poaching these FCS guys is Pitt's best path forward, along with taking shots at guys at Power 4 schools they have ties to and focusing on roster retention. They're going to win no straight up bidding wars for talent. As far as players who transferred out and transferred down and had success, most recently, Stephon Hall had a good season at Youngstown State. Before that, Khalil Anderson went to East Tennessee. I think had a decent time there. Judson Towner went to Akron and did a decent job. Had some some productivity. I would say, playing at Akron, and I think he was a starter, a full-year starter. Those were guys who transferred in 2023. Let me find. I was looking at the. I have our transfer tracker in front of me. I had brought it up to try and find the names. As far as guys who left last year, Aiden Henningham went to Albany State and had a good season there. Trey Anderson, the offensive lineman at Utah State, ended up getting on the field. Not a lot, though. You don't find a lot of guys who went somewhere else and transferred down a level and seemed to really excel. A couple of guys here and there, but that's about it. To your other point about bringing in Western Carolina players or players from the FCS level or Group of 5 schools to bring in as transfers at Pitt, I agree with you, and we talked about it this week on the Morning Pitt. You posted your question Wednesday. I think it was that day's Morning Pitt when we talked about kind of a path to success for Pitt, of what they need to go after in the transfer portal. And actually, Jim and I talked about it Wednesday night on the live show. We talked about Pitt's best approach to the transfer portal is find standout players either in the Group of 5 schools or FCS, and that's getting tougher to do. I think those really standout guys in the Group of 5 schools are still ending up going to the SEC or the Big Ten, where that money exists. I think Narduzzi maybe, or somebody made the comment of, Stefano Millen in that 2018 season, standout offensive lineman at Kent State. Who knows if Pitt could afford him if he was transferring now, if a player of that caliber was transferring now, and I'm not sure they would be in the running. So you got to look to the FCS ranks. You got to look for those players who are standing out at that lower level that you can bring up and give them a chance to play at a higher level of football. And then, you look for backups on Power 4 teams, guys who have talent that you believe in. Maybe you know them from the recruiting process or whatever it may be, and you bring them in and give them a chance to shine in a starting role. And I think we've seen a lot of guys at Pitt excel under those circumstances. Donovan McMillan, MJ Devonshire. This year, Nick James played well. Shane Simon came in and had a couple good seasons. Eli Holstein. These are guys who are at Power 4 schools. Talented recruits. I mean, all those guys we just mentioned, or most of those guys we just mentioned, McMillan, Devonshire, James, Holstein, they were all 4-star prospects, but they were down the depth chart. They weren't getting the opportunities that maybe they wanted, and so you bring them in, you give them those opportunities. I think Wednesday night Jim mentioned Lyndon Cooper and Marcus Minor. Those kinds of guys. Ryan Jacoby. Bring them in, give them an opportunity, and see what they can do. Those are the kinds of guys that Pitt is going to have to build their roster from as far as the transfer portal goes. You're still going to have high school development that you focus on. You're still going to work in that way. But as far as the transfers you bring in, I think you want the standouts from a lower level, and then those depth guys from other Power 4 teams that you think maybe can shine when given the opportunity. So I think that's probably, because you're right. I mean, if you go into a bidding war with Oklahoma, well, we saw what happened this week with the Western Carolina offensive lineman. He's going to Oklahoma. Pitt really wanted him. He's going to Oklahoma. How does that happen? Well, it's an SEC school with SEC budgets and SEC pockets. And if it comes down to a bidding war, and it's a dollar-to-dollar comparison, Pitt's probably not going to win those most of the time. Richard A. asks, Chris, do you think that college football programs will start hiring GMs and have an NFL structure with the portal, recruiting your own players, coaching, etc.? It seems to be a heavy burden on the head coach and his assistants. The ever-changing situations in college sports wouldn't surprise me at all to a GM type of person who runs the football program. I think you're seeing that. I think you're seeing more and more you're seeing more and more programs hire someone in a general manager role. What's going to be interesting, though, is it's not I think the transition is going to take a little bit. I think it's going to be difficult because it's not like the NFL. It's not. I mean, in the NFL, I think position coaches have input on who they draft or who they acquire through free agency, but the GM is making a lot of those moves. The GM is making a lot of those personnel decisions. Whereas I look at Pitt and probably a lot of schools, particularly if you have, offensive coordinator who's a head coach or a defensive coordinator who's a head coach, I mean, they have a very specific idea of what they want. You could look at Pitt, right? And you could look at Pitt's defense. We've seen plenty of guys, local guys, who would seem like, that's a power forward defensive prospect. Why isn't Pitt recruiting him? And it's because they feel like he doesn't fit in their defense. Now, as a new GM, somebody who comes in from outside going to have a clear idea of what that looks like. So I don't know if there I don't know if there would be full autonomy, but in terms of managing NIL budgets, in terms of working in conjunction with the coaches on priorities, either on the current roster or in the transfer portal, having someone who can kind of oversee that side of it and handle the negotiations and work on bringing guys back, for retention or adding in transfers out of the portal. I mean, I think you will see someone take on that role, and a lot of schools have. A lot of schools have already taken on general manager roles. What'll be interesting to see as we go along, and I always reference this, I think it came out like a year or two ago, it might have been just a year ago, I think it was Texas Tech, had, they effectively turned over the whole high school evaluation and offering process to the scouting department. And the assistant coaches weren't doing that at all anymore. And it might not be 100%. They might still have some input and, be looking at guys, but a lot of it or most of it was being done by the scouting department. And, I don't know. I don't know if I see that getting wide, broad acceptance in college football, but that's a possibility. And I mean, that follows the NFL model, the GM model of really the GM and the scouting department making those personnel decisions. College football is pretty entrenched in its ways, and the guys who work in college football are pretty entrenched in their ways. So I don't know if I see a full transition to that, but I do think as, budget becomes more of a real factor and something to consider, I think you'll see more of those kind of roles being created and filled. Jay Lazinger says, I read in the Pitt magazine that we had under $5 million total given out for NIL. Any idea where this sits in the ACC? I think it has to be at the bottom. Yep. I think so. Like, I don't know if it's dead last, but it's not far from it. I don't know if those numbers are correct, but I can tell you that from what I'm told, whatever Pitt's number is, it's pretty far from the top. And it's not really in the middle either. It's in the bottom. That's the reality. And you see it play out, right? We look at this week, we look at the number of Pitt targets who have, in the transfer portal, who have visited Pitt and picked another school, who have picked another school before they even visit Pitt. Because I think I said last week, like, they come on these visits and they talk money. I think a lot of the money discussion is done before they ever even take the visit. I think a lot of these guys know what offer is on the table before they even go visit a school. I think they get that worked out. Like, why waste your time? Why waste my time and your time taking a visit if the numbers aren't going to work, if the money's not going to work? And so, those things are sort of understood. And so, these kids know where they stand. They know what the deal is as far as NIL and money goes. And you saw it this week. You saw a bunch of Pitt targets going to other schools. Well, you don't end up in that situation because you have the biggest NIL budget in the ACC or even a mid-level NIL budget in the ACC. They're near the bottom. And so when you see these impassioned pleas from Alliance 412 trying to get Pitt fans to donate to the collective and, you turn your nose up at it, you say, I don't want to do that, I'm not going to support that. Well, I don't think you can really turn around and complain if that top O-line target or that top receiver target goes to another school. I'm not like sitting here making a sales pitch for Alliance 412. I'm just stating the simple facts of the situation. All right, this is why guys are making decisions. This is why schools are landing the transfers they're landing. You look at the schools that have a lot of transfers right now, you can probably correlate that with the bigger NIL budgets. It's not rocket science. Iron 99 says, what's going on with Pelusi and the Board of Trustees? I don't know. I don't know. Iron 99 said you were going to ask about this in the mailbag, and I'll take the question because I try and take as many questions as I can. But, I don't know what the situation is. It looks like an ugly situation. It's unfortunate that a guy who has been a part of Pitt athletics for such a long time, almost 50 years, actually 50 years, since his playing days in the 1970s, for John Pelusi to have what appears to be an acrimonious relationship with the university, with the Board of Trustees, over whatever, and I think he raised a variety of issues in the lawsuit that he filed. No matter what it is, it's an ugly situation, and I don't think that well, being a Pitt man, a diehard Pitt man, someone who has given everything he's got to this university, I don't think that gets you off the hook. I mean, like, it doesn't mean you're automatically right about everything. And I don't assume that about John Pelusi. I think, for whatever it is, it's just unfortunate that and disappointing that a situation comes to this, that someone in his position feels compelled to take the course of action he's taken. And I don't really sit here and take sides other than to say it's just disappointing and unfortunate. So I don't know the backstory. I don't know the details of what happened. I think John Pelusi is a very strong-minded individual. I think he's an outspoken individual. Someone who has strong opinions about the University of Pittsburgh and Pitt athletics. And, right or wrong, I think he truly believes that he wants what is best for Pitt. And so it's unfortunate to see someone with that kind of passion and dedication driven to this course of action. Whoever's right, whoever's wrong. It's unfortunate to see. You never like to see that kind of ugly situation. Smenges asked the question that I did a little research on because I like this question. It reminded me about a content item I want to do. Starting with grad transfers and city year transfers, then on to the new portal. Who's your top 5 Narduzzi transfers in? And who else became solid or better starters? So I actually, 2 years ago, August, I found it because I keep it handy for reference, and I need to actually update it. 2 years ago, August, so August 2022, I ranked all of the transfers Narduzzi had brought in to that point. I think at that point it was 29 guys. Now, obviously, they've added a lot more. 2022, 23, and 24. I mean, we're talking about 3 more seasons of transfers when they've added a bunch of guys. I'm sure the number is well over 50 by now, maybe 60 or 70. So it's going to be much more difficult to rank all of them, but I will try it at some point. However, going down the list, I've got about 14 guys that I think you would put in the top group of transfers in for Pat Narduzzi in terms of their contributions and what they've done. Of course, we got the legal pad for this. In no order, these are the guys the transfers who I think have made the biggest impact. Kylan Johnson, Lucas Krull, Stefano Millen, Keaton Slovis, Tyler Wiltz, Shane Simon, Desmond Reed, Eli Holstein, Donovan McMillan, Taysir Mack, Nathan Peterman, John Patrician, DJ Turner, and MJ Devonshire. Like I say, in no specific order. When I ranked them prior to the 2022 season, my top 5 were number 5, John Patrician, number 4, Lucas Krull, number 3, Stefano Millen, number 2, Marcus Minor, number 1, Nathan Peterman. I think when you look at your top 5 right now, I mean, I think Peterman has to be in that group. I would say Donovan McMillan has to be in that group. I would say Desmond Reed should be in that group, even though it's only been 1 year. You get into a tricky spot here with guys like Stefano Millen, Lucas Krull, Marcus Minor, Kylan Johnson, John Patrician, MJ Devonshire, Donovan McMillan. You know what I mean? Like, I think I already mentioned McMillan. I don't know who my top 5 would be right now. Maybe Peterman number 1, McMillan number 2, maybe. Reed is in the top 5, I would say. It's tough. I don't have a concrete top 5 because I jotted down the 14 guys who I think made the biggest contributions, but that's not even all 14 because Marcus Minor would be in that group too. That makes him 15. Number 1, I think, is probably still Peterman. I think McMillan has a case to be made. I think MJ Devonshire for the heroics and the flair for the dramatic would deserve a recognition there. I don't know if he's top 5 or not. I do think Minor is still probably top 5. I think Millen probably is. Maybe this is your top 5. Some combination of these guys. Nathan Peterman, Desmond Reed, Marcus Minor, Stefano Millen, and Donovan McMillan. Maybe that would be your top 5. Interesting. There's probably a deeper discussion to have about the fact that 4 out of those 5 guys are on offense. But that would probably be my top 5 off the top of my head. We'll think more about it as time goes on. I'm sure I'll change my mind for sure. Pitt is it 93 says, does Pitt have any say-so with scheduling? The men's basketball game this Saturday at 1 has to compete with the college football playoff game. The January 1st game has to compete with the quarterfinals playoff game. This has to keep some fans away, plus some of the TV audience. I would say no. I would say they have no say in it. I would say they have no input on on what time they get scheduled. I mean, that's TV, right? Like, you give yourself over to television completely for the money, and that means you're giving yourself over to television completely for the money. And you don't get a say in when you play, what time you play, what network you're on, what day it is. The conferences, dictated by television, decide that. You can probably make a case. You can try and say, look, come on, man. But they're not going to change it because of the college football playoffs. You know, you might be able to make a case like, hey, please don't schedule us against the Steelers. Although I feel like in 2000, I don't know, one of those years they faced, I think the Steelers played the Ravens in the AFC Championship game and Pitt had a basketball game that night. I sort of remember that. I remember there were a lot of people at the game because obviously it would have been a Big East game at that point in the schedule. And I think it was during the Big East time. Somebody's going to be in the comments immediately telling me what game this was and how I screwed this up. But, you know, they were in the Big East schedule at that point, so it was a big game. So there was a crowd, but I didn't think it was also a crowd that was largely fixated on Steelers-Ravens in the playoffs because that's kind of a big deal. It might have been the ACC. That might have been like the Jesse James game or something like that. Don't like, I shouldn't have even said that because that was Steelers knowledge is lacking, and I'm getting things foggy in my head of I think that might have been the Patriots, right? So Jesse, never mind that. I edit that out, guys. Can we remove that? Can we? Hey guys, can we cut that out in post? Can we take that out? Everything I just said as I rambled about how I don't remember the specifics of AFC Championship games anymore. Yeah, we good? We good? Thanks. All right. But no, they have no control over it. Let's take this one for Pittman, 1973. Maybe it's because Nakai Johnson and Elliott Donald are leaving Pitt without living up to their 4-star rating, but Narduzzi does not seem to do well with 4-star prospects out of high school. How many of Narduzzi's 4-star high school recruits became starters for him? By starter, I mean someone who started at least 8 games in a single season. The first two that come to mind are DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford, right? They started games and played a lot. Sincere Edwards was a 4-star. I don't know if he didn't start games this year, but he played a lot, and I think he will be a starter down the road. Isaiah Neal played a lot this year and started a handful of games. He's going to, they're mostly on defense. I think part of it, honestly, particularly with the offensive guys that Pitt has gotten, exposes a bit of a flaw in the rating system where maybe some of those guys were overrated. I mean, we look at them and we say they were 4-star prospects because they were, but the truth is some of those guys were probably overrated and not good enough to merit the 4-star ranking that they got. And it's not just the offensive guys. I mean, there's, Elliott Donald and Nakai Johnson, like you mentioned. There was Naquan Brown was a 4-star prospect. I mean, there have been guys who were 4 stars that didn't really pan out on both sides of the ball. And I mean, some of it is just, well, that's just how it goes. Some guys don't work out. Some of it is, probably a number of these guys were overrated. And that's just the simple, it's just the reality of it. All right, Zemmeister 1992 says, overall, do you see the new landscape in college athletics and college football leading to more parity? For example, this year in college football, the only undefeated team was Oregon, and I'm still not convinced they're a dominant type team like we've seen in the past. Is that an exception to the rule or the rule going forward? I think you'll have maybe more parity, but it'll still be limited in how far it stretches. I think as opposed to having 4 or 5 of that group of 15 top schools. So you've got 15 or so top schools, right? In college football, the truly elite tier. And I think in any given year, 4 or 5 of them are legit national championship contenders. I think what you'll see is maybe the parity spreads among, further out to the 12, 14, 15 teams, as opposed to just being isolated each year within 4 or 5. You know what I mean? So one year it might be Oregon, Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. And the next year it might be Texas, Michigan, whoever, Penn State and Alabama or something like that. Instead of that, which I think is what it was, I think what you'll have is, 14 or 15 teams every year, or that parity will be spread among that elite tier. And I think you'll also end up with a greater variety of national champions due to the playoff format. I think the playoffs are going to make things a whole hell of a lot more interesting in the postseason than they've been in the past. I think having a 12-team playoff, while it's unwieldy and should be moved into December because it screws up the schedule and everybody's crying about Bo Perbula having to transfer and leave Penn State, blah, 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 blah. I think, despite all of that, I think it's going to make for incredible spectacle. I think it's going to make for incredible drama. And I think you're going to end up with not necessarily new teams winning the national championship. Like, I don't necessarily expect SMU to go on a run and win the national title. But I think you'll see, I don't think you'll see as many teams repeating as national champions. And I think you'll see, I think you'll see different teams winning each year. They might not be from outside of that top group of 12 or 14 schools that are always going to be there, but there'll be more variety in the champions themselves, as opposed to just one team winning it 3 out of 4 years or something like that, is my thought. All right, last question here. It's a fun one, and I thought a lot about how to answer this. Bruno Pitt fan says, what's one story that you can tell where you had information, sat on it, and thankfully never said anything because it wasn't true, even though you had great sources telling you it was? I thought a lot about this, all right? And I have to think about the best way to tell this story. And it wasn't something that necessarily wasn't true. It was true, but it got resolved, so to speak. I'm not going to name names in this story, but at some point over the last 20 years that I've been covering this team, there was one year the team was getting ready for its bowl game, and we got a pretty credible report that a pretty important player on the team was not going to be eligible for the bowl game. He was going to be ineligible academically. And, we get pretty good sources telling us this, start calling around, start digging in, and the response we got was strong enough that we decided to hold off and not report it yet, to wait to see how the situation played out. And ultimately, Pitt found a way to get this player eligible for the bowl game. I think Pitt went on to win the bowl game. I'll say that. And this prominent player played a fairly prominent role in the bowl game. But if it hadn't gone down like that, if that story had actually come to fruition, which I think it was true when it was told to me, and then ultimately sort of changed course. But if it had come to fruition, it would have been hilarious for a lot of reasons, that this player screwed up like that. But fortunately, this was back in, I can't say when it was, but this was in the days when, academics still mattered. Players were still ruled academically ineligible. How about that? When was the last time somebody was ruled academically ineligible, by the way? Just as an aside. It seems like that's not even a thing anymore. But back in the day when players could be ruled academically ineligible, and the football program and various athletic officials would work very hard with professors in the academic side of things to try to rectify the situation. They were able to rectify that situation, and it all went off without a hitch. And I had a good chuckle to myself about what might have been if that situation had not been resolved. That might not be as juicy a story as you're hoping for, but that's one of my all-time favorites that I sat on. That I sat on, and I'm ultimately glad that I sat on it because the situation did resolve itself. But I still think back on it, chuckle. That was a while ago. It's past. Bygones be bygones and all that stuff. Anyway, all right, that wraps it up. Thanks for tuning in today for the mailbag. Thanks for all the questions here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag. I appreciate everybody who contributed. Glad to do these questions as always. It's always my favorite episode of the Morning Pitt every week, so I'm glad we could get some contributions. Thanks for watching these videos all week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use the promo code PIT24. Have a great weekend, and we will catch up with you on Monday morning for the Morning Pitt. Kick off the holiday week right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.